Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest today is Matt Omernick. He is doing a lot of different stuff, but he got started in games for health and really helping people with cognitive impairment. And we're going to get into a bunch of that different stuff. And as you were talking about that in our well, actually, first, let me welcome you to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stuart. So good to be here. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to chatting.
So the first thing that came to mind while we were talking beforehand, and you said your previous background was Neuralink, because Neuralink is so interesting because it's like specifically focused on cognitive impairment, but I don't think it's going to stop there. And I mean, we can go right into the crazy stuff. Like, where do you think we're headed to in this future? Particularly as it relates to cognitive impairment, because technology is so important. Like, technology is so important for helping us to heal and also to expand our capacity and potential and all these different things. But then Neuralink represents a sort of barrier as well that's going to be crossed, that is already being crossed, that will also have some crazy stuff happen as a byproduct. I would love to hear what you think on that.
Yes. I hope you have like 4 hours. Let's roll. No, I love this topic. I think backing all the way up, there is a lot of folks that would say that the world we're in today is literally in a cognitive crisis, and that is very plausible and very believable for a lot of reasons. I think one is the amount of stimulation that exists in our world is unprecedented compared to any other generation, except for maybe all the future ones. So it's different. We're in a different place, and in some ways, it's incredibly powerful, and there's so much opportunity. The other hand, we are still kind of primitive brains living in a really intensely
Rich.
full world. Yes. We're constantly bombarded by so much stimulation from every single direction. And we're thankfully, the newer parts of our brain are there to be able to have executive function and try to make some decisions and prioritizations about information. That is the most advanced part of our brains, but relatively speaking, it's still far behind where we're really at. So I think any neuroscience, anyone that's studying this is going to be able to point to that as why we're struggling, why we're seeing these increases in mental health problems and this cognition kind of crisis. And we could just stick our heads in the ground and be like, oh no, this is terrible, and run away from it. Or technology is not going anywhere. So how can we martial arts that? Can we judo that technology and use it to kind of help catch us up? So that concept and the kind of like stigma that has existed with things like video games for me that's really bugged me over the years. So the combination of those things is what kind of led me to move from traditional games and entertainment into like, wow, we're seeing data and evidence now truly that these things change the neural network of the brain physically. And if you build them from the ground up in a custom adaptive way, you can create a closed loop of reward and feedback and continue to train and actually really make a positive difference here. So now that world has come true. There's an entire new industry of digital therapeutics and FDA approved product games. So that was a lot, but that's kind of the foundation of kind of where I've moved now with the onset of AI, biometrics, a lot of these other wonderful things that are here. I'm trying to kind of collect those, connect the dots, and bundle those as well to try to use these powers for good.
Okay, yeah, it's really interesting. The thing you mentioned about augmentation has been on my mind as well. We could get into the fact that there's a lot of people out there who think that AI is fundamentally not an augmentation, but a fully new consciousness. I happen to be on the side that says this is a very augmentative technology, that everything I've seen so far is augmenting my own intelligence and sort of like an agency revolution, where it's all these things that I used to have so much trouble doing. I just go and ask the AI, and and it's even to the point where I'm now leading every Wednesday AI Whisperers group down here in Buenos Aires, and leading a sort of, we do presentations one Wednesday, and then the next Wednesday we show people how to use AI to code first, because coding is really the easiest kind of, we don't need no code tools anymore, because the AI is so good at coding. That's the first like really clear area where it's much better than me, and it's much better than any other non-technical person at coding. And so it's just like an immediate in, like they can see that this thing is more capable. So back to that augmentation part. And I'm really curious, I would love to understand more about the augmentation in terms of, because it is almost like an exocortex now. It is like the phone. It was already an exocortex. The phone was linking us to all the currently available knowledge, and AI is basically just compressing that knowledge and then allowing us to get easier access to that knowledge through our phone or through the computer. And this part you mentioned of somehow building the feedback cycle to protect the brain is a really interesting. And I'm wondering, like, it feels like we're probably very early in that. Although you have some background in how it might not actually be too early, that I'm completely out of this. This is totally new for me. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think there's at least two things in there that I want to throw some opinions at. One, most broadly, I think is like the augmentation question, right?
Yep.
Is what is this? On the hand, I love that you could argue there's really no experts yet to be able to really predict and answer that question, right? However, if you look at the state of things today, where they are, what this AI can and can't do, and your best guess trajectory of where it might go, I'm still today in the augmentation camp. To be clear, my focus in AI is mostly in creativity, in art.
Mm.
This is where I'm most interested, where I'm spending a lot of my time. These are companies I'm advising for and trying to help guide some of these tools in the right direction.
Beautiful.
Because I'm very fascinated by creativity. Generally, that's me at my core. What is it? How does it work, right? But this question of like, what does AI and AI generative art and things like mean for creativity? It's a huge question, a lot of fear out there. I'm in the camp today that this is not replacing creativity.
Yes,
I
yes,
don't think it's
exactly.
going to wipe out all artists and creative jobs. I think if you ask me today, what I'm seeing in that part of this world is this is another tool and a skill set that can enhance creativity and productivity. I'm old enough to remember when Photoshop came out and everyone was like, oh my God, it's going to take everyone's jobs and destroy it. Didn't end up really being the case. You know, Photoshop helped enhance creativity, speed, and productivity. And what I'm seeing today with the stuff that's even on the kind of most cutting edge of producing art for games and things like this, that's what it is. It's a productivity tool. And I love, and we can come back to this or go deeper on it, but I love the games industry is such this like historically this like beautiful place where a lot of technologies get sorted. They get figured out first there. It's like this test bed that you can kind of punch a new technology through, and game developers are so iterative and fast and creative that what comes out ends up being kind of the model for, I think, other industries moving forward. And I think that's really true with AI generative art in particular.
Yes. Okay. There's a bunch of places we can go from here. There's
and sorry, that was only like
the one part. Go for the other one. I'm taking notes.
Good.
I'm taking notes. I've saved it.
Awesome.
What was the other part?
I think you were talking about the closed loop. I didn't mean that we had to jump there, but I was just catching myself.
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
I think this idea of this kind of closed loop is a really important one as well. Generally speaking, any scientist or biologist will tell you that the closed loop is the best way to change anything, like physical or mental. It's just being able to take a measurement and then apply exercise, whether I mean, right, then adapt that exercise, remeasure, readapt, and you just continue to do that. And it's the best way that anything changes, any system changes. And these real-time technologies, whether it be video games or now AI, can do that at such a finite, super fast, super personalized, customized way. That's really, really, really powerful. So that topic alone is a big one, but I think that we're going to start to see, we're starting to feel that, we're starting to see that. But I think that's the one that's going to be like really kick this into high gear.
And I've got a friend down here who is I don't think it would be a problem to share what he's doing. He's doing audiobooks. And so he's taking Creative Commons stories from the 1400s or the 1500s and all the other stories that have, have been like all of our modern stories come from these stories as well. Like it's all like, you can't really say like all, you get it. I'm sure the listeners get it. It's basically like, and so he's creating those and he's using AI to make audiobooks, and his first target will be parents to help the kids have these stories that have descended from our thing being audio or being AI generated, basically. And so this is a really interesting one because it gets into both of the things we were talking about. But the real thing you said about the closed loop Right now, it feels like very dystopian with kids getting access to YouTube. And like, so this was like a problem back in 2018, 2019, where the kids would go on YouTube and then the AI generation would then give them new things that were being just developed by these almost programmatic. I believe it was programmatically like early versions of this AI, and they would go into these like really strange things that were generated by AI, but the kids would just go through it. And so I was talking with him the other day, and it feels like that world probably won't extend too much into the future. And this gets back into the games as well, because somebody just did a Doom AI generated Doom, trained
Saw
on
that.
Doom, and created it generatively as the player goes through, creates the new art and the new scene from the game. And so it almost like we're going to enter new worlds. Part of that's going to be dystopian, part of that's going to be utopian. Well, actually, and part of it's just going to be normal life as well. Normal life might get
Yep.
significantly different as well. That we could talk about this. Is all open to discussion. But so that's one point on that, on the closed feedback loop. So that feels like a positive one, because I think parents have had a large problem with this open internet where the kids just get on the internet, and I don't think that's going to stay around too long. Like it feels like the internet's going to become, like you said, like a closed feedback loop, personalized, almost like a video game. What do you think? Is the internet going to become a video game? Like where are we headed?
Oh, I wish I knew the exact answer, because I think it could go either way, right? I
Mm.
mean, it could get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
It's the same with the original promise, right, of the internet was like, wow, it's going to be this
Yep.
great equalizer,
Yep.
and it's
Yep.
going to be
Yep.
like sharing of knowledge across the playing field. And yet, in some ways, this closed loop kind of thing just sends people down this deeper rabbit hole. So I don't know is the short answer there, but the question of dystopian and utopian, I think is an important one. It's obviously a hot topic anywhere. Part of why I'm out there and involved in this is that I'm recognizing that we're at such early stage here. Now, I think of it as like three buckets. And I'm using kind of generative art, AI, and creativity as my example here, but
Mm-hmm.
this probably applies to most AI. So there's one bucket which is just responsible AI, ethics, legal, protection, rights, like all this stuff. That somebody's got to figure this out. And there's a lot of smart people hard at work on it. It's sloppy right now, but that has to get figured out. That bucket has got to get worked out. I don't know how long it's going to take. It's going to be weird, but it's not. It's still Wild West out there. But that's going to get figured out. Bucket one. Bucket two is a lot of really smart people making sure that it's not going to turn into Skynet, and we're not going to all just have a Terminator walking down our street saying you humans are the problem, right? There's really smart engineers, people working on making sure it doesn't kill us. And then there's like this third bucket, I think, which is it's early enough that we can still paint a positive future, like a positive North Star, create examples, be sci-fi for a moment and imagine and think of like, how could this play out, and try to guide that and try to guide these tools and these techniques to, I say it's cheesy, but I said the genie's out of the bottle. Like the sooner that we get the genie to grant our wishes, the better.
Mm.
And so on the side of art and generative art, I am violently against artists being their copyrights being taken, or them not getting paid for their work, or the scraping of that work and not acknowledging it and hiding and getting away. Like that has to get figured out. It's terrible. But I've kind of trying to move past that and be like, okay, let's assume we figure that out. Then what? What does it really look like? And so I'm trying to stay in the utopian future here, and recognizing that we can tap this still into the direction that we want to go. And I may be fooling myself, but I'm definitely trying.
Well, and it goes back to this augmentation piece, which is that the artists, in the same way that the programmers, I'm noticing there's this really interesting tension here, where in the programming specifically, which is that the programmers with the experience to really use AI to augment their abilities are doing it very slowly. They're not adopting it. Me sitting here as this neophyte programmer who has been able to do things that 4 years ago I would have just like, it is magic. It's magic what I'm able to do. If I were to have the skills that a senior developer would have, I would be like, I would have magic at my fingertips. Based on what you've been saying, and based on what I've been experiencing with AI Whispers, the same is that for the augmentation of the art. If the artist accepts it and kind of goes with it, they can augment their art. using the AI in the same way Photoshop. Do you think that that's accurate? Anything to add in terms of
I
that?
do. Yeah, I mean, augment's a great word, but I think it's one of the words. A lot of the fear that I hear are people like, you know, has it just destroyed creativity, right? Is when it
Yeah.
generates a
Yeah.
new piece of
Yeah. Yeah.
artwork, is
Yeah.
that artwork something original that a human could never ever think of, or is it better, or does it just wipe out the need for us to think out of the box and try new ideas? I feel strongly that no. I mean, the reality, if you open the machine and you look at the gears, it is limited by the input of
Mm,
creative people, right? And
mm,
it always will be. That ceiling will
mm,
be. It's learning from what we create as humans, and as long as we stay ahead of the head, we always will. It's not going to supersede. It's not going to surpass. It is only as good as what you put into it or what it's trained on. And so, in some ways, you could argue that that just is fuel for the fire of creative people. Be like, okay, let's evolve a new part of our brain now where we have to like double down on creativity. What does that look like? What does that mean? So I'm trying to lean into that as a nice forcing function to be like, well, number one, I don't have to be afraid of it, um, taking away my creativity. I look at it as, oh, okay, this is like a little just jab, like, okay, cool, let's get more creative.
mm.
Let's get a little crazier. And that historically always helps the world move forward. Um, and so
So,
whether creative art or just creative thinking,
and
that's what keeps us progressing.
I love being down here in Buenos Aires because Buenos Aires is one of the most creative cities that I've ever been in. The art is out of this world. And so I talk to a lot of artists, and there's this really interesting connection between art and suffering. Many artists become artists because they have to express that kind of juice that they've created through the suffering and let it out. And it's a therapeutic thing. Do you agree? Do you agree? Like, do you agree with that? That like, what is the relationship between art and suffering? And this could go back to the cognitive impairment too, because cognitive impairment is one of the greatest sources of suffering as well. What's your take on all that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a undeniable connection through all of time. I don't think it's exclusively suffering,
Yep. Mm,
unless you want to define suffering maybe as this unshakable desire to do things differently.
mm. Yeah, there's a
Um,
novelty aspect of it as well. There's some people, and then there's just beauty, rather than running away from trauma. I mean, but like there's an alchemical thing, alchemy of the Jungian taking that suffering and creating beauty out of it. But there could
yeah.
also just be beauty unrelated to the suffering, like just wanting to create beauty, basically. What
Yeah,
do you think about
yeah,
that?
and
Yeah.
and I think a common thread there is that sometimes I've seen this with creative people oftentimes is sometimes they'll feel like they are an outcast in society because
Yeah,
they
yeah,
think differently,
yeah, yeah,
right? Or
yeah,
they
yeah, yeah.
feel like they're not heard, or the way that they learn or the way that they see the world is just different than everybody else. And that just chips away and can be suffering in and of itself. Not to belittle any
Mm,
extreme trauma, right? Which clearly is it, but it's a different kind of suffering as well. And those who have the outlet or the ability to be able to embrace that and be like, that's okay, that, to be able to express, and not only okay, but it will sometimes lead to solutions that no one else is going
yeah,
to come up with.
yeah, yeah.
And once that little loop happens, I think for creative people, they're like, oh, I get it. This is great. This is something I should be really proud of. And my outcast feeling, my suffering, my trauma, whatever that may be, has an outlet that can actually produce something that could not have been produced otherwise without those ingredients,
Mm. And this
without
gets
the
back
output. You said,
it
yeah,
gets back directly to the AI question because so far there's talk of autonomous agents, and now it's specifically within the programming. I went from an agent bear, meaning that I don't think that the agents are actually here yet. Autonomous agents are here yet. Now I'm a bull on that particular one because I've seen what Replit is, an online developer experience that
mm,
basically they just implemented uh, agents that take you from a prompt to a fully functioning website. The same thing I've been teaching these AI whisperers how to do with just prompting, and then they go put all the pieces together. Now Replit has implemented an agent that does all of that together for you at one time. Uh, you still need to prompt it. You still need to prompt it to do whatever you want to do. And that prompting feels like it's related to these deep aspects of humanity that are not capable to be automated. We were talking about measurement and feedback loops and all of those different things. I believe that who we are is beyond measurement, and I think that there's a lot of like I don't think the AI will tap into that. I don't like it feels like it's silicon. It feels like it's material, and there's something deeper that it can't touch. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you think about that?
That's awesome. I love the silicon analogy. I do agree. I think part of our success as a species, if you want to call it that, is that
Hmm.
we are so adaptable.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things that really sets
Yeah.
us apart. And this is again the newer parts of our brain, right? Are
Yeah. Yeah.
developed for that reason, is to be
Yeah.
able to adapt to our environment, adapt to any particular situation at multiple fractal levels. And that alone is the silicon that you're talking about, right? It's like when pressure is applied, we have a way of finding the path of not even path of release resistance, right? But then we find the crack, we find the way, we
Yeah.
find the way to squeeze the putty out and
Yeah.
go and do
Interesting.
this other thing. And so I think it's ironically, it's one of the, you know, things that has been part of humanity for a very, very long time. And yet it's serving us now. We just
And
have
it's
to be
also our
able to.
downfall too. Like
Absolutely.
the adapting to situations, we can fool ourselves in that adaptation process. There's a great series called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis by John Vervaeke, who goes into the like he goes through the whole Western tradition of philosophy to understand the cognitive science from the neuroscience from this deep philosophical lens that humans have been trying to struggle through for a long time. And that same part of an adaptation can also help us to adapt to situations that are not healthy, that are not beautiful, that are totally like insane. And it's all just like this self-reflective feedback loop that becomes a big problem.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. Yep. I
yeah,
mean, there's tribalism, a lot of things
yeah,
related to that are
yeah,
clearly there.
yeah,
It's just so fascinating and fun to think about. But yeah, whenever I go down that road, I'm like, okay, like I see it, it could be
yeah.
gloomy down there. Let me like try to start chipping away at this other road and be like, okay, well, how, in the case of AI, right? Like how we need a future where an artist, for example, right, can use AI to enhance their work, to augment their work, to make their productivity really great, but do it in a totally safe and ethical way, so they're not being
Mm.
taken advantage of, they're not stealing from someone else. And the good news is I'm already seeing this happen. All today, there's a bifurcation happening of large language models, how they're trained, and the companies who are being like, no, we are building this from the ground up to ensure these things are done well and done ethically and responsibly. So it makes me happy to see, again, how fast this is all going, but it also means that some of these solutions are coming really fast as well. So
And
yeah, I
that
still, yeah, look for that.
and that brings back the adaptation as well. And like I don't like my take is that it's not going to be dystopia, it's not going to be utopia. It's going to be dystopia and utopia according to the users of this technology. And so like there will be little fragments, and this also brings in a larger trend, which is that CNN, the way that media used to work, which we can trace back to radio and then going into TV where you have a broadcast medium, that seems to be disappearing. And we're moving quickly into this world that's fragmenting in terms of the groups, in terms of the tribes, as we were talking about, and there will be a lot less kind of communication between all those different tribes. So it feels like everything is going to get fractured. And then you add AI into this mix, and this is kind of coming to me now as we're talking, is this it's going to create these tribes based on AI. Uh, but it won't be dystopian or utopian. But like because of that lack of communication between the tribes, it's gonna feel like it feels like there's gonna be a Cambrian explosion in terms of experimentation going on. And for my personal opinion, experimentation is the way that we become adaptive, right? We have to experiment. And so it is going to be crazy, but also it's always been crazy. We've always had tribes. Like if we go back and we look back at the tribes in humanity, like those tribes were all just experimenting with different cultural kind of mythologies and everything like that. And then it's only with the rise of Enlightenment European civilization that we have this now global view. And that feels temporary. It doesn't feel like the global view is going to last a lot longer. This kind of goes back into deeper philosophical trends. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I mean, the adaptivity, evolution, like we can just say these are hand in hand for a second here,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
ways we are, right? I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I don't have, but I remember one of the first things that really, really struck me. So I have two daughters. I have two daughters that are 10 and 12. And when we first had kids, and we had both the two girls, I was amazed, like number one, how much they just kind of come out somewhat more baked than I thought, right? They're realized a
There's
lot of their
something there. Yeah. Yeah.
personality
Yeah.
is there, a lot of who they are. They're just like, that's who I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah.
But then you start to see really quickly this crazy adapt that happens. And
Yeah.
the reason that
Interesting.
siblings, and this was an evolutionary biologist who told me this, they're like, the reason siblings are so different is that just like a canary in the Galapagos or whatever, they are competing for the same
Whoa.
resources, love, whatever, in the same place. And so they, by evolutionary design, are immediately finding different ways
Pathways.
to get
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
resources,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where
Interesting.
you get the sweet one, or you get the aggressive one, you get like, and you see this with siblings across the board, right? And to think about it kind of at that level, I was just like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it just reinforces like this adaptive part of us as humans is at every level.
That's a great
Um,
thread.
it's
This
super fun to
great
think
thread
about.
into just like the from my understanding of evolutionary biology, not even evolutionary biology, psychology, and I'm no psychologist. I'm not many things these days, except a guy who's liking to use AI to code. But zero to two, really important fundamental changes, because we have our neurology, we have our biology, we have our genes that we're given to by our parents, and then from 0 to 2, all of those experiences are really, really important, foundational for the psyche and such. And then it's like an evolutionary environment. The kids are so focused because they're not, from 0 to probably 6, they're not really, don't have many other influences coming besides you're a parent. You could probably, tell me more about this than I know, because it's all just kind of what I've observed from the outside. I don't have kids, so but from 0 to 6, it's like all within that family unit, basically, for all of those influences and that sibling rivalry and sibling love too, because it's not only rivalry, it's also love. Like they're also part of the same family. Anything interesting to add there?
It reminded me of another little kind of tidbit that came from the same individual. They had said that there's a lot of evidence that by the age of 7,
Mm.
you can start to actually predict like even financial responsibility as an adult.
Mm.
At that point, like you can start to see the trajectory like already forming there. Which again, I was like, wait, what? Like, how is that possible? I don't know. Can't cite this, the paper on that or anything, but I think it supports that same concept that you were just talking about, right? Is that
Mm.
there's so much that's happening in those years that we probably underestimate on what's getting cooked at that point.
So we got another 10 minutes left. What are you most excited about? What are you working on? What are you helping you said you're working on consulting projects and such. Anything you can share that's getting you really excited about this pathway that you're creating?
Yeah, I think there's two areas in particular that I'm just fired up every morning to wake up and be part of. One is this kind of like digital health, digital therapeutics, this idea of these interactive experiences that are just getting more incredible and powerful and wonderful every single day. But we've crossed this line now where all the evidence is there that things like video games can be exceptionally good
Mm.
and can be positive for mental health, even off the shelf video games in many cases. There's just no question anymore. So we live in this era now where that has been definitively like unassailably passed, right? Like good. These things can be used for great good. And so seeing this industry kind of form, I remember when we started Achille, this company, which was like 12, 13 years ago, we started a small alliance called the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, which is a group of companies. I think we started with like 4 companies at the time, which had high clinical rigor and validation
Oh,
and
nice.
engaging experiences for health, right? And now today, I think there's 140 companies in the Digital Therapeutics Alliance and more. And just seeing with XR and again, biometrics, a lot of these things are happening. And now AI, just seeing what's going to happen with interactive experiences. And both for our health as humans, for us as species, for the planet, like I think we're entering a new zone where we're going to see, it's not going to just be like those video games, those are the devil's
Yeah,
instruments,
yeah,
right?
yeah. That's
We're in a
right.
new place. I heard that from like an older doctor in the early days of Achilles when we said we were going to make the first FDA approved video game. So there's that. There's a whole bucket that I'm very excited about. The other is very specifically AI and creativity. Again, plenty of scary aspects, a lot to be figured out. But I think as we are coming out of this, and I can see the daylight already being very bright and shiny in many of these areas, that this is really going to help push us forward as humans, and it's going to test our adaptability and be a pretty big leap for us, not just technology.
Mm.
And so, yeah, just being any part of that and trying to, even if I can just use a pinky finger to send a brush of wind to guide it a little bit, that's going to make me feel really good.
So I want to go back to the FDA approval thing. What was that like going through the FDA approval process?
Is incredible. A lot of people when we first set out to do it, we just said we were insane. We were
Yeah.
crazy, that we were looking for a world of pain, to move something and change something as big as like healthcare in the United States.
Because it's outside of their framework, right? Because their framework
Absolutely.
before that was like drugs,
Yep.
devices, and devices is a weird one. I went through that personal one, but
Right.
the drug FDA is mostly on the drugs, right? I mean, food, no, they do food as well. So yeah, can
Yes.
you for those of us, I'm one of them who don't understand it very well. Can you explain more about what the FDA process is like, and then share your experience about
Sure.
adding
Yeah,
the framework
absolutely.
into it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we started the company, we had run a really successful trial at UCSF initially with the core
Mm,
technology that
mm,
ended up on the cover of Nature, which I didn't appreciate back then, but apparently that's like Academy Award, right, for a neuroscience to be on the cover of Nature. Um, because it showed what these experiences can do in both measuring cognitive impairment and decline as we age, but
mm.
also showing that we could train it, and not just like temporarily train it, but show durability over 6 months, 9 months, real world outcomes of improvements in cognitive function. So that was a really big deal. So when we started the company, we didn't have to choose to go the FDA route. We could have just said, well, let's make this a wellness product, right? And we can't make any claims. Yet we're sitting on this mountain of beautiful data, right? It's showing that this is a
Mm.
new category of medicine that's effective and safe. And so we felt this responsibility, not just for the company, but for the kind of this new category, right? Like, well, if this really needs to get like in the system, we need to go through it like it was a drug, right? So we founded the company with that plan to run these giant, expensive, long, randomized controlled trials that look exactly like a trial for a drug, where there was a placebo,
Mm.
for example, right? A
What
control.
was the placebo?
Different trials had different ones.
Yeah.
Some of
Okay.
them were the same game, but with the active ingredient taken out, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, you
Others
got it. Got it.
were games that were like word type games, where all of our studies showed that that's what people expect are the types of games that actually improve your
Oh,
cognition. Turns out they
interesting.
don't.
Yeah, like the
So
luminosity.
that's a whole cool topic to open up there, that discussion. But anyway, trying to get to the answer to your question, we decided to go the FDA route because we realized we had to like prove this
Yeah.
unassailably as validated, undeniable medicine. And so went that route, ran all these trials. I think we had run like a total of 36 trials over the years, and depression, anxiety,
Mm,
ADHD,
mm,
traumatic brain injury, hemofog,
mm.
um, and showed without a doubt, right, these things are real. Getting back to the FDA, you're right. There was not a category for this, right? And they were awesome because they were honest. They were like, we don't have a thing yet. They're like, it's actually a medical device, is what it is.
Mm.
So approved as a class 2 medical device, de novo, meaning something brand new type of medical device. And but that process was fascinating and long. And it's weird when you're running a business where your biggest, most important milestone is literally out of your control. You run the trials, you collect all the data, and you like,
And that's
okay,
what
and then
I mean, that's what biotech companies have to do, right? Like that's what they all like if they're providing a drug, they have to go into that framework. That's what makes it so hard. Is that they have to predict into the future, into some decision that will be made, that will change the whole business, which makes
absolutely.
it so fascinating.
It does. And yeah, and you like a lot of the giant pharma companies, it's like $1 billion in 10 years to develop a
Yeah.
drug. And most of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
those just don't even pan out. And they're like, well, okay, let's try another one. It's really different for a startup, right? But the advantage of a digital kind of therapy, right, is that you can build it more quickly, you can iterate it more quickly. So that was another big question that came up during the whole process of like, wait a minute, if you get approved, what happens when you have to change it? Like, you can't just change the drug and go, like, you know, so we had to work through with the FDA, like, what does that look like? And in the end, essentially what we helped do with others, right, was design this kind of new category, a new way to regulate and quality and the quality controls and all the systems that you need to do for medical devices, all that stuff, like modify and create appropriate versions of that for software.
That's cool.
There have been some precedents for like, well, you have to regulate the software for the X-ray machine or something that might be on the road. That's like 30 lines of code, you know, not a video game, which is like
millions.
3 million.
Right?
Right?
Millions?
So,
yeah.
Right. And so really fascinating journey that I could talk about forever is like working with them to kind of figure that out and then finally breaking that seal and opening up this doorway and literally a precedent, right, for others who can build off of that data and make comparisons and bring real, helpful, useful, safe products into the market and into patients' hands. So really, really proud that we had a hand in doing that. And I think it's just the beginning.
It's really interesting. One of my favorite things to talk about is the AI bureaucracy arms race that we're going to head into that feels like because one of the clearest use cases for AI is to take an LLM, fine-tune that LLM on a process for like navigating the government's defense contracting to fill out all the paperwork. So like that feels like it's going to happen really quick. I'm sure people are already doing that. And so I would like to ask one last question, which is how much of that process that you went through do you think could be applied by what I just said about sort of like taking this giant regulatory framework and then having AI do whatever it can do? Do you think that that's real?
I hope so. I hope a lot is the answer.
Yeah.
We began an interesting process to answer this question that I just posed, which or that was posed to us many times, is like, what happens when you change the game?
Yeah.
Like you have to resubmit and go through the entire FDA process again if you change a character. So there's many answers to that, but one of the things that we started to develop, this is years ago now, was once we started collecting all this data from all these different trials, and we started to get a very clear fingerprint, or for lack of a better term, of what it looks like when a patient is getting better. Like, what does the whole thing look like as they're experiencing this product over many, many months? Like, what's the common? Here it is. Here's the graph of like, this is what it looks like when they're getting better. So we started to build the early versions of kind of machine learning and AI stuff where we're like, oh, let's create this kind of like virtual patients where they're based on all the real data. And we can go ahead and change, I'm making up, like change one thing from red to green, right? Or put a hat on the character or change a whole game feature, whatever. And one of the first things we can do is run it through that machine. Do we get a green light? Or do we get a red light? Like, is it still doing what it's supposed to be doing? Does it still follow that curve when we made that change? So we get some quantitative data based on real stuff on whether that works. And then, of course, there's other processes on top of that. But so you imagine now the day we're in today and moving forward, that concept and what you just said as well is like being able to kind of create these more reliable, higher speed virtual patients to be able to test many of these things is huge. It's huge. It reminds me of one other quick little story that I always love from the Achille time was we did a study with Pfizer early days. They approached us and they said, we're looking at finding different ways to find Alzheimer's markers. And we suspect your technology might be able to tell the difference between someone who may have pre-onset Alzheimer's or pre-cognitive impairment. So we ran a study with them where Pfizer paid for like, I forgot how many people in the study, but a lot, to go like everyone had PET scans, which are these expensive, like, you're putting radioactive material in your body kind of thing. And that, at the time, like that was one of the only ways to be able to detect amyloid plaque in the brain, which isn't always, but is sometimes an indicator of maybe you'll get Alzheimer's. But so they scanned all these people, all of them were cognitively the same. They ran a whole battery of tests, and then half the people had amyloid plaque, and the other half did not in the study. And the game, within 7 minutes of gameplay, you could tell the difference between the two groups.
Wow.
That was just like, whoa. That's insane. Like you could parse the data between those two. And so, and then that was, 8 years ago. So you think about your comment and like what could be done
Yeah,
on
it's
that
going to go
scale.
crazy. It's
Absolutely.
gonna be nuts.
So
Well,
yes, yeah, it's a fun Wild West to be in.
and so
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on. How can people find out more about you and what you're working on?
Sure. Obviously, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm currently advising and consulting for a range of companies, and really interested in kind of all these spaces and others, and really just in a super learning mode and trying to help like all boats rise and help guide these things. So reach out if you have questions or want to talk. If there's something I can do to help. But yeah, that's where to find me. I'm just pleasure to speak with you, and thanks for opening up such fun topics.